I caught my husband and daughter-in-law red-handed in a romantic moment in my office. I was angry and shouted at them. My husband said, "I live my life my own way." Then, he threw a rotating world globe at my head, injuring me. They left the office, and I decided on revenge. The very next day, I gave them a shocking game-changing surprise, and they were begging for mercy. I always thought I had a perfect life. My name is Linda, and for as long as I can remember, my life revolved around family, business, and trust. At 52, I owned a thriving textile business in Chicago, one that I inherited from my parents. It wasn't just a company to me, it was a legacy, a dream passed down through generations. My husband, Jake, 55, was the one I entrusted to run the day-to-day operations. He'd been by my side for over 30 years. We built this business together, and I always believed that we were a team, stronger because of our shared commitment to our work and each other. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of the truth. My son, Daniel, was 30 years old at the time, a grown man carving his own path in the world. He had recently married Ava, a young woman of 27. I was excited to welcome her into our family, thinking that she would be a sweet addition. Ava seemed kind, bright, and eager to fit in. I had no reason to believe she would ever do anything to harm our family, especially not after I went out of my way to help her find a position at our company. I believed in the value of trust and loyalty, two things that, to me, were non-negotiable. But then, things began to change. I noticed Jake becoming distant over the last 6 months. He wasn't the man I married. Gone was the warm, affectionate person I had shared so many years with. He began to work longer hours, often staying late at the office or claiming business trips. His excuses became more frequent, and I found myself questioning him, though I never let on that I felt something wasn't quite right. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that the stress of managing the business was weighing on him, that he was just tired and needed some space. But deep down, I could sense that something was off. His behavior had changed too drastically for me to ignore it. I felt the distance between us growing, but I kept telling myself that things would get better, that he just needed time. Then came the evening that shattered everything. It was a warm Friday night when I decided to have dinner at one of our favorite restaurants in downtown Chicago. Jake had said he'd be home late that evening, so I went by myself. As I sat at my table, sipping a glass of wine and looking out at the busy street below, I noticed a familiar face. It was Jake. He wasn't alone. He was with Ava. My heart sank. They were sitting at a cozy corner booth, talking quietly. But it wasn't just a casual dinner between colleagues. No, this was something more. As I watched them from across the room, I couldn't deny what was happening right in front of my eyes. Jake reached across the table, took Ava's hand, and gazed at her with an intensity one had never seen before. Then, to my horror, he leaned in and kissed her. It was like time stood still. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was suffocating in the realization that my worst fear was true. I watched as Jake gifted Ava an expensive necklace, one that I had seen him pick out in a jewelry store months ago. He was giving her everything he should have been giving to me. I could barely keep my composure. I was seething with anger, humiliated beyond belief, but I couldn't make a scene. Not in public. So I did the only thing I could do in that moment. I pulled out my phone and began recording. I needed proof that could hold them accountable for what they had done. I focused the camera on them, capturing the intimate moments they shared, the stolen kisses, and the way they smiled at each other. My heart ached, but my hands were steady as I filmed. I stayed for a while longer, my mind racing with a whirlwind of emotions, shock, disbelief, anger. I couldn't even look at them anymore. When I finally left, I did so quietly, without saying a word to either of them. The weight of what I had just seen hung over me like a dark cloud. How could they betray me like this? How could Jake do this to me? How could Ava, my own daughter-in-law, be the one to tear apart everything I had worked so hard to build? The next morning, I woke up with a heavy heart and a mind full of questions. I couldn't shake the image of them together, the way they looked at each other. I knew I couldn't let this go. Not after everything. So, I made a decision. I took a drive to the office. I needed answers, and I was done waiting. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I simply grabbed my things and drove downtown, my mind set on confronting Jake. He had to explain himself. He had to face me. When I walked into the office, I was quiet, but my presence was undeniable. The moment I stepped into Jake's office, I froze. There they were, Jake and Ava, together, in an intimate moment. Neither of them had noticed me walking in, and I could hear their soft whispers, their laughter. I felt my blood boil as I took in the scene before me. "Jake," I finally said, my voice shaking with anger.
Ava.
Both of them jumped in shock, looking pale as ghosts when they saw me standing there. Jake opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. I could see the guilt and panic on his face. Ava, too, looked stunned, but I didn't care about her expression. I wanted to hear the truth from Jake. "What is this, Jake?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "What have you done?" Jake tried to excuse himself. "Linda, it's not what it looks like." "Don't lie to me," I snapped. "I saw everything. Last night, at the restaurant. Don't you dare try to deny it." He stood there, looking defeated. I could see it in his eyes. He knew I wasn't going to just let this go. But then, as if on impulse, he hurled a decorative globe at me. It struck my head with a force that knocked me back, causing me to stumble. The pain was sharp, but I didn't move. I was frozen, not from the injury, but from the sheer audacity of what he had just done. "I live my life how I want to," Jake spat, his voice cold and distant. "And you can't stop me." Ava didn't say a word. She just looked at me, almost as if she were waiting for me to break down. But I didn't. I wouldn't. I stood there for a moment, glaring at them both. They had both betrayed me, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. Without a word, they both left the office, leaving me standing there, in the midst of everything I had built, with nothing but a head injury and a broken heart. The pain in my head throbbed as I stood alone in that office, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Jake had thrown the globe at me. Ava had just stood there, silently complicit. I was shaken, but the fury inside me was greater than the sting of the globe hitting my skull. I stood there for a moment, letting the reality sink in. This wasn't just some passing affair. This was betrayal at its deepest, most disgusting level. Jake and Ava had crossed a line I never thought they would. The man I had loved, the one I had trusted for over 3 decades, was not the person I thought he was. And my daughter-in-law, Ava, who I had welcomed into our family with open arms, the one I had helped find her place in the company, was no better. I was humiliated. I was heartbroken. But more than that, I was angry. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let them destroy everything I had worked for. I wasn't going to stand by and let them tear apart my family and my business. I went home that night, but I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying the events of the day, Jake's dismissive attitude, Ava's cold stare. And all the while, I was trying to find a way to regain control of my life. I had spent years building my company, making sacrifices, trusting people. Now I was going to have to fight for everything I had. The next morning, I decided to confront Daniel. I couldn't keep this secret from him. He had to know what his wife had done. I showed him the video I had secretly recorded of Jake and Ava at the restaurant.
It was as clear as day.
Daniel's face changed as he watched the footage, the shock turning into disbelief, then anger. He looked at me, and for a moment, I saw the pain in his eyes. "I can't believe this," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I trusted her. She was part of our family. And now, this." I nodded. "I know, Daniel. I trusted her too. I trusted both of them. But they've betrayed us, both as a family and in business. This is bigger than just a personal affair. This is about everything we've built." Daniel didn't say anything for a long while. He just stared at the screen, his hands clenched into fists. I could see the wheels turning in his head, and I knew that he was coming to the same conclusion I had. This wasn't just about the affair. This was about the future of our family, our company. and we needed to take action. "I'll file for divorce," Daniel said quietly, his voice filled with resolve. "I can't stand by and let her do this to me."
To you?
I nodded, but deep down, I knew that this was only the beginning. We had to take back control, not just of our personal lives, but of the company that had been at the heart of everything. Jake had been running it, yes, but it was mine. It was always mine. And I wasn't about to let him destroy it too. Later that day, I made the decision. I sent the video to all of our close family members in a private group message. I wanted them to see the truth for themselves, to understand the depth of the betrayal. It wasn't just Jake's actions that hurt me, it was the fact that he had dragged Ava into it, the woman who was supposed to be part of our family. The fallout was swift. The video spread like wildfire. Our relatives were shocked, some were angry, and others were deeply disappointed. But one thing was clear, Jake and Ava's affair had become public knowledge. They couldn't hide anymore. The shame, the humiliation, they would feel it for the rest of their lives. It wasn't long before I got a call from one of our family members. "Linda, we had no idea." "We are so sorry," she said, her voice heavy with regret. "But you don't deserve this." "None of us do." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I was beyond caring about their sympathy. What mattered now was what I was going to do next. I was done playing the role of the quiet, trusting wife. I was taking control of my life and my business. I went to the office the following day and started restructuring everything. I was no longer going to let Jake manage the company. I took the reins, meeting with the board, reviewing financials, and making sure that everything was in place. It was time to make sure that I was in control, not Jake. The business that had been a part of my family for generations wasn't going to be destroyed by his selfishness. Jake tried to reach out to me, of course. He sent messages.
He called.
He begged for forgiveness, even though his apologies meant nothing to me. When I refused to answer, he showed up at the office. His face was desperate, pleading. "Linda, please," he said, his voice breaking. "I didn't mean to hurt you. You have to believe me." I didn't believe him. I didn't need to hear his excuses. Not after everything. "I don't need your apologies, Jake," I said coldly. "I've made my decision. We're getting a divorce. And you're no longer part of this company." The words stung him. I could see it in his eyes. He knew I wasn't backing down. This was over. I was going to make sure that everything I had worked for, everything I had built, would remain in my hands. Jake's betrayal had stolen my trust, but it wasn't going to take away my strength. And as for Ava, she had taken my son's love, my trust, and now her marriage. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming what was mine. And that was exactly what I was going to do. It was hard to believe how quickly everything had spiraled out of control. My world had shifted overnight. One moment, I was a successful businesswoman, proud of my family and my accomplishments, and the next, I was left picking up the shattered pieces of trust, love, and loyalty. The betrayal was unbearable, but the anger that burned inside me was even worse. And that anger pushed me to act. I'd made the decision. No more hesitation, no more second-guessing. The video had done its part, exposing Jake and Ava to our family and anyone who could get their hands on it. But I wasn't just going to let this blow over. Jake and Ava were going to pay. Not just for what they'd done to me personally, but for what they'd done to everything I had built. I couldn't let them have the company. I couldn't let them walk away unscathed. I made sure to tighten my grip on the business. I held a meeting with the board of directors the next morning and informed them that I would be taking over the company's management. I made it clear that Jake was no longer involved in the day-to-day decisions. After all, the company was mine by inheritance, and I would not let him or anyone else tarnish the legacy my parents had worked so hard to build. Jake tried to plead his case to the board, but no one was listening. The weight of the scandal hung over him. His reputation was tarnished, and no one in the company could look at him the same way again. As much as he tried to argue, he was powerless. He'd lost his credibility, and he was about to lose everything else. Meanwhile, Daniel was taking his own action. He filed for divorce from Ava immediately after seeing the video. He had been devastated, of course, but in the end, He knew there was no coming back from this betrayal. His trust in Ava was gone. The woman he had loved, the woman who had seemed so perfect, was now someone he could never look at the same way again. Ava had no idea what was coming. She thought she could escape the consequences of her actions, but she was wrong. Daniel cut all ties with her, no more contact, no more connection. And when she tried to reach out to me, I ignored her. I wanted nothing to do with her. Jake, though, wasn't giving up so easily. Every time I turned him down, he came back with another excuse. "Linda, please," he would say. "I'm sorry. I know I made a mistake. We can work through this. We can fix things." I wasn't interested in his apologies. The man I had trusted for years had destroyed everything, and now he wanted me to fix it? It wasn't going to happen. I'd worked too hard for everything I had, and I wasn't about to let him walk away without facing the consequences. He begged again one afternoon when he showed up at the office, looking defeated but still clinging to the hope that I might give him a chance to explain. "Please, Linda, just listen," he said. I didn't even flinch.
No, Jake.
"We're done. I'm taking control of the company and my life. You've lost everything. And now, you're going to have to live with the consequences." He stood there, silent. I could see the realization in his eyes, that he was losing it all. The life he had worked so hard to build was crumbling beneath him. And it was all because of one terrible choice. I wasn't going to allow him to make excuses. I wasn't going to feel sorry for him. Not after everything he'd done. Jake and Ava had made their choices, and now they were going to suffer the consequences. I wasn't about to let them destroy my legacy, my family, and everything I had fought for. This was my time to regain control, and I was going to make sure they didn't get away with it. The reckoning had only just begun. It's strange how much you can change in a short amount of time. Only a few weeks ago, I was living a life built on trust, believing that my family, my marriage, and my business were solid foundations. Now, everything I once knew had been turned upside down. But that wasn't going to break me. I had been tested, and now it was time for me to rise above it all. Jake and Ava had caused so much pain, but they had underestimated me. They thought I would just sit back and let them walk away from the wreckage they'd created. They were wrong. After I took control of the company, I started restructuring everything. The first step was making sure Jake's influence was wiped out completely. I made it clear to everyone involved with the company that he was no longer part of the leadership. His actions had destroyed his credibility, and I couldn't allow someone like him to have any say in the future of the business. The board of directors supported me, and within days, Jake had lost his position, his privileges, and his access to anything related to the company. As I worked through all the details of securing my assets and stabilizing the business, I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders. I had taken control, not just of the company, but of my life. And that felt like the first real victory since all this started. Jake continued to try to make amends. He begged, pleaded, sent me countless messages, each one more desperate than the last. But every time, I refused. I had no more time or energy to waste on someone who had so utterly betrayed me. I could see the desperation in his eyes when he came to me one last time, but there was no more sympathy left in me. I was done. "I'm sorry, Linda," he said one evening, standing in front of me, his voice soft and filled with regret. "I know I made a terrible mistake. I don't expect you to forgive me, but can we at least talk? Can we figure this out? I can change. Please, I love you." I looked at him coldly, not even a flicker of emotion stirring inside me. "Jake," I said, my voice firm, "you lost everything when you decided to betray me. Don't think for a second that I'll forget what you did. We're done." And with that, I walked away, leaving him standing there, a broken man. The divorce was finalized soon after. Jake fought for his share of the company, but I made sure to keep everything I had worked for. The legal process was long, but in the end, I had what I wanted. The company was mine, and I was free of him. Ava wasn't exempt from the fallout either. Daniel, still heartbroken but resolute, had already filed for divorce from her. He severed all ties with her, and she found herself alone, with nowhere to turn. It was painful to watch, especially since she had been like a daughter to me, but there was no going back for either of them. Over time, I started to rebuild my life. I focused on the company, on making sure it grew stronger. I surrounded myself with people who genuinely cared about me, people I could trust. Slowly, I began to heal, regaining the confidence I had lost in the wake of the betrayal. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my life. And I did. I took the time to enjoy the things I had neglected in the past, spending time with Daniel, rebuilding our relationship, and even indulging in small pleasures that I hadn't had the time for. I was no longer just a wife or a businesswoman. I was Linda again, standing on my own 2 feet, stronger than I had ever been before. A year later, I stood at the helm of my company, confident, secure, and surrounded by the people who truly mattered. I looked back at everything that had happened, the betrayal, the pain, the rage, but I no longer felt anger. I felt peace. The life I had built was mine, and I had reclaimed it with dignity and strength. I had turned the darkest chapter of my life into the beginning of a new one. And in that moment, I realized that the true victory wasn't in the punishment or the revenge. It was in finding my strength again, in walking away from the ashes of betrayal and into a future where I could finally be free. And that, to me, was the sweetest revenge of all.